At the end of your life, how will you know if you truly won? And I'm not just talking about professionally or financially, but personally, in your marriage, with your kids, and with your own soul. If you're like most parents today, you are running at full speed, work, practices, meetings, endless to-do lists. And you're probably feeling like two ships passing in the night with your spouse. I know I can feel like that at times, but you might be wondering, like, is this it? Am I spending my time, energy, and attention on what truly matters? Listen, if that's you, pause whatever you are doing and stay with me because this episode is your wake up call. But it's not only your wake up call, it's a beacon of hope. Welcome back to the Families of Character show. I'm your host, Jordan Langdon, and today's guest is someone who knows what it's like to have it all and still feel the emptiness of misaligned priorities. John Olinger is a former Nike marketing executive who worked closely with legends like Kobe Bryant. He had a thriving basketball career of his own and a beautiful family. He's married and has 3 sons. And he also had a career that looked picture perfect on the outside. But then life hit hard. He experienced a real loss in his family, which forced him to reevaluate everything. And that tragedy, like many tragedies do, became a turning point for John and eventually the inspiration behind his new book, Worthy Wins. John, thanks for being here. Let's start at the beginning and tell us about some of the mountains and valleys that brought you to this moment. We're so glad to have you on the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Jordan. Honored to be with you and your audience. So, mountains and valleys, we hear that God's with us in both of those, and that has been the case for my life. And I grew up, had a great life. I was only child. My life first started to get a bit challenging when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer for the second time. She'd had it once before I was born, and then had it again around the time I was turning 10. And unfortunately, her breast cancer just ended up ultimately taking her life. And so when I was in 6th grade, my mom passed away. And
Wow.
that had such a profound impact on what happened from there, and even probably has impact on why I'm talking to you today. So that was a valley. In the midst of that, which was awesome, I had an amazing group of men who came alongside me and had built this safety net for me in that space. And it's a longer story for another day, but basically in 4th grade, I started going to a Young Life group called Campaigners. It was a Bible study with high school guys. So I was in 4th grade hanging with these older guys, unbeknownst that the relationships that were being built there would be in place to support me when I went through this really difficult valley. And so a guy named Eric Schofield, amazing guy, invited me to be a part of that group as a 4th grader. That was a mountain in the midst of those valleys. So I went on from there. I've had some awesome experiences. I played basketball in high school and college and overseas, and for sure those were mountain moments for me. I feel so grateful. Ended up ultimately coming back, landed a job at Nike, and finding my way through a gigantic organization of highly talented, highly intelligent, highly incredible people, and also a place where the only thing that ultimately the company cares about is that you're successful at your work. And so in the midst of my 10 years at Nike, I had some awesome mountaintops, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of them. I had some low valleys when maybe even it might have looked on the outside like there were mountaintops. And then ultimately, you shared briefly about it in the introduction, like my big valley, my big unexpected moment came when my dad ultimately had an accident. And the crazy background there is that, I'd come to a place in my career at Nike where I was really grateful, but Nike was reorging. This was 2020. We all know it very well. would be forever ingrained in our minds for different reasons. But Nike was reorganizing in that time, and it was possible I wouldn't have a job. And so my wife had asked me, like, hey, have you thought about moving east? And she's from Florida. And so we'd had that conversation a bunch of times. And when she ultimately asked me that question, usually when she asked me the question the few times she had before, I'd always be like, oh, I'm in the middle of this project, or I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I want to finish this thing that is fun, or advancing my career, or whatever. But on this time, I said, you know what? I'm open to it, because the reality was I didn't know if I was going to have a job at Nike anymore. And so we
Now, at this
ultimately,
time, did you have any children yet?
yeah, we had three kids. We had three
Oh,
kids.
okay. You
So
had your three boys. Okay.
yeah, but at that point in time, they were 5, 3, and 1.
Okay.
Not even one. 5, 5, 3, and under 1. And so
Okay.
we were, quite possibly contributed to my willingness to consider this was, we were in Oregon at the time, and I don't know where all the listeners are at on here, but they're all over the country probably. And Oregon was locked down. Like that's, we were 5 months into lockdown with 3 young, energetic boys, and they were awesome. But yeah, we were like, we're tired and we're not getting much space. And so the thought of moving east to be a little bit closer to family, to Aaron's family, was appealing. And so when I said yes to that question, she said, well, what are you scared? Are you scared of leaving Nike? And I said, I'm not scared of leaving Nike. She said, well, what are you scared of? I said, I'm scared of leaving my dad. And my dad was in Oregon, but like I said, I was an only child. And so the thought of moving away from him, he lived about 45 minutes away from us, was something that I wasn't super excited about. And he and my stepmom were not that far away, but they were also like, it was going to be tough if we were going to go somewhere else. And so
Mhm.
ultimately we decided to pray for 40 days. And so we set out on this 40-day prayer journey of saying, like, hey, God, shape our hearts in this time. Give us direction, give us wisdom, discernment about what might be best. And so we started praying. And I think probably when most people set out on a prayer journey, or at least I'll speak for myself, there's optimism about the good that's going to come from that.
Yes.
And like, God, what are you going to do? It's going to be awesome. Um, and that was not our experience of our 40-day prayer journey. Because 5 days in, we get to day 5, and that
Hold
morning I
on
get
for
a,
just a second. Let
yes,
me
yes.
interrupt you
All right, come on.
because I know this is getting good, but I love the details. Okay, when you said you and your wife set out to pray together
Yeah,
40 days, what does that actually look like? If we're a fly on the wall, are you guys like once a day you're getting together, you're kneeling down together, you're holding hands, whatever? The two of you are praying or both of you are praying like individually?
that's a great question. So it's both. And what we did, we weren't like, so every night as is, we pray every night before bed together. So that's like naturally a rhythm already in our life at that
Great.
point, and something we've been doing since basically we got married. And so that was already there. And then there was individual sort of moments where we both were saying, hey, we're both leaning in, connecting with the Lord on this. And then we would have times in the midst of that, outside of that, when we had breaks in the chaos from our boys being home, for where we do it together. So it was a blend, but some was together and some was on our own, of sort of seeking God in that.
Great. So the intention was set that you were going to be praying about the move specifically for 40 days and kind of on
Mm-hmm.
your own together and all of
Yep.
that. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now tell us what happened like
No, it's a
5
great.
days into this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we're praying. All things are good. And then I get a phone call on the morning of the 5th day of praying, and it's my stepmom calling to tell me that my dad has had this freak accident. And he basically went to the grocery store really early in the morning because he was trying to avoid the crowds in Oregon. And he was in his 70s, and he was like, all right, I'm going to go to the store. And this was September, so it wasn't like it was slippery outside, but it was one of these mornings where if you're in a place where it's been warm for a while, hasn't rained for a while, the first rain, creates some slippery ground. And it had rained that morning, and somehow in the midst of loading his groceries in his car, he slipped and ended up hitting his head and ended up with a traumatic brain injury.
Oh
And
my
so we were like, wow, okay, God, that's not really how we saw this journey going. And we decided in the midst of that, all right, well, we're going to keep praying. This isn't like, okay, my dad hasn't had an accident. We're not stopping, but that was definitely not how we saw the journey going. And so,
At that time, did you say, could, because I'm just thinking personally, like I can be quick to interpret what I think is God's message. Like,
mm,
there it is, day 5, dad
mm,
slipped, he had a bad injury. That means we should stay here,
mm,
right? Because like that was a sure sign that like something is going on with
right.
him. So, but it doesn't sound like you guys looked at it in that way.
Yeah, it was uncertain, and it wasn't. It was something, but it what we didn't take it as this is exactly what it is.
Okay.
But it was like, okay, let's keep praying. And ironically, I was supposed to have a day of solitude that day. I had like been planning to go have that day of solitude, and so I still went, but obviously it was a different kind of day than expected. So I remember sitting there at this by a lake, not that far from our house, but by a lake, a restaurant that had this space where you could sit outside, and just being like, what the heck just happened? And so much uncertainty. You know, they put him in the ICU, but it was just not clear. And because COVID was happening, it wasn't like I could go there
Oh,
because they would only allow one person per family per day to be able to go in. And so my stepmom went, which just totally made sense and right. And I'm just sitting there waiting
oh,
for updates. And you know, there wasn't a lot of updates other than he was in and out of consciousness, and they ended up intubating him, and I ended up going to see him I think about 5 days in, like once he'd stabilized some. So in the midst, we're just praying and wondering and waiting. And my stepmom and I ultimately ended up alternating days. So she'd go one day, I'd go the next day, and we just sort of did that for the rest of the time. And in the midst of praying, my wife at the time actually worked for Young Life. And so in about 20-ish days into the praying, she felt like it was time for her to take a step back from that. So she tapped out in the middle. She didn't like quit her job immediately, but she let them know like, hey, I'm gonna transition out. So that happened in the midst. And then we're still praying, getting close to the end. And on day 39, I get an email from HR at Nike, and they're like, hey, you got a meeting tomorrow morning. And anybody who's been a part of a big organization or has been in the midst of reorg knows that when HR sends you an email, you're going to find out your fate in that
yes.
meeting. So not day 39, not day 41, day 40 of the 40-day prayer journey was the day I found out my fate at Nike. And Nike said, we love you and we have this great job for you. The only problem was that the job was a great job, but it wasn't the type of job that I wanted. And it was a great job. It was, and ultimately, here's the foreshadowing. I took the job, and I'll explain why. But the job was leading global brand marketing for men's running. So it was a great job, a job that tons of people would love to have. But for me, I had been telling them for 2 years that I wanted a different type of job.
Hmm.
And the type of job I wanted wasn't about title. It was about influence and how I could spend my life and my work helping pour into people so that they could have an easier journey at Nike than I did. Because
Wow.
I got thrown in the deep end of the pool and I figured out how to swim, and I had good success in the company, but it's a very sink or swim kind of place. I thought I could help people learn to swim better. And so I'd been telling my bosses that's what I wanted. But there was one problem. 5 of my 6 bosses were fired in the wave of job cuts before me. So all the people I had, 5 of my last 6 bosses were fired in that
Wow.
previous round. And so when it came time for me to get placed somewhere, and part of it was organizationally, there was just limits to what they could do. But all the people who knew exactly what I want were no longer around either.
Mm.
And so they showed enough to say, hey, we believe in you, we're going to give you a job if you work in running at Nike. That is a they've signed off and said, hey, we give you our seal of approval. And so and it was a take it or leave it. It wasn't, hey, can I see the menu and pick some other item? It was, do you want this job or would you like to take a severance package?
Ooh, and that was day 40. All of that in that one meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was still unclear with what was going to happen with my dad. Is he going to fully recover, or is he going to be fully dependent on people for the rest of his life and just be a shell of himself? Those were sort of the two extremes that we were wondering about. And so when they said, hey, do you want to be unemployed or do you want to have a job? I said, I'll take that job. And when do I get to spend more of my time on people? And they said, we don't know. Maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And so what that day meant for me was it was the day that I knew that I was free to leave Nike whenever that time came. Not because I wanted to, but because they didn't know when they could allow me to do the thing that I'd said was really important to me. And it wasn't that I didn't get to impact people or influence people, but I had my previous like basically 3 years had been like leading huge projects, and you're leading people in that, but all your investment is into the project, and you get a little bit of like osmosis into the people by doing that. And I was saying like, hey, I want to spend 90% of my time on the people and helping them thrive and become the best selves, because that will improve the way that we do work at Nike. So we get to the end of the day, and my wife and I get our kids down, and we finally get the chance to talk about the 40 days and say, well, she says, what do you feel like God said in the 40 days? And I said, I think God said, I trust you. You're free to choose. And she said, yeah, I feel the same way. And so our choice at the end of that was to say, we might stay or we might go, but for now, we're going to have this holding pattern and see what happens with my dad. And we weren't ready to pack up and go, but we also weren't ready to say, hey, we're staying forever. And unfortunately, like his body and his brain just could not get back on the same page. And so he ended up passing away about 20 days later.
Gosh, John, that's a wild 2 months.
Yeah.
60 days you just
Yeah.
took us through. And what I heard is the freedom that on day 40 you felt free. You felt this Heavenly Father give you permission to follow the passion that he had put inside of you as a young boy. Like, John, I'm joining you. I join you in your passions. I put these passions within you for a purpose, right? Like, you are free. You are free to do this. But at the same time, you've got this grief that you're about to face. You feel freedom, right? In the decision to follow your passion and your career. But then 20 days later, you get hit with this wave of loss. Again, how do you get through this? You and your wife, Erin, how do you make sense of this? How are you navigating this? You've got an idea of what you're going to do with Nike for a while, but then you're processing the loss of your dad and the news of that, and you're still in Oregon. How do you go about as a team moving through that while you're raising 3 kids and shut down?
When you phrase it all that way, it's like, how did we do that? And think back to, if we hadn't been praying, how would we have handled it? And how might that have been different if we hadn't entered into that step of inviting God in? Because it could have easily just been like, all right, well, do you want to move east? And I could be like, sure, let's consider it. And am I sure that there's times God speaks audibly to things? Yeah, for sure. Most times I don't get the audible answer, but
No.
that doesn't mean that I shouldn't invite God into the journey, that we shouldn't have invited God in. We invited God in, and that transformed that. I don't think God was pulling the puppet strings and saying, oh, well, day 5, here you go. Like, here's this crazy thing. I think like God joins us in the journey of life as the brokenness of the world unfolds. So I think the reality was we were in survival mode in the midst of that, but also we knew we were in it together. Ultimately, when the dust settled from my dad's passing, I told my wife that I think we needed to move to be close to her family. And that wasn't necessarily what she had envisioned as moving east. So she chose to trust me in that, even though it wasn't necessarily exactly what she had planned or wanted. And we went on that journey of packing up our lives and saying goodbye to some really great friendships and stuff in Oregon.
Mm. So when you say that wasn't necessarily her idea, was she thinking like a couple hours away or
She
living
was
on the
thinking like,
beach or
yeah, I mean, so her parents live in Northeast Florida, and so it was more like, are we going to Nashville or Raleigh or somewhere that's like an hour flight away from Florida rather than a full day of travel to get there from Oregon?
yeah.
And there were lots of reasons for that. And it wasn't that I had never planned either. I wasn't thinking we'd ever move to her hometown, but the change in our circumstances and the reality of her parents at the state in life they were in and wanting to be involved and in the mix with our boys, and for me, no longer having my parents alive, it's like, what's it all for? Like,
Mm.
why wouldn't we go be near them? And I don't think that's necessarily the right choice for everybody. Every family is different and every circumstance is different. But for us in that moment, that's what I felt like the right choice was. And
Mm.
that choice was founded because I wanted to pick the pieces back up and I wanted to find ways for us to be connected to our parents, and I wanted to find ways for us to be more connected as a couple, and like having some other hands in the midst was going to be helpful.
And I can tell Erin is a godly woman because of one word that you said, which was she just trusted me in this. It wasn't necessarily the idea that she had in mind originally, but I felt that that's sort of where I'm using my own words here, but I hear you saying, like, I kind of felt like the Lord was calling us to that proximity to her family, and she followed. She trusted, and she allowed me, as the man, the husband in this relationship, the father to these kids, to lead. Because I
Good.
think as
Yeah.
a woman, I can say there are so many times when I take the reins from my husband, or I'm
Mm.
like, get in the passenger seat or the back seat, and I'm gonna get in the driver's seat and I'm gonna drive this decision, down the road. And I regret it every time. And it's the time where I can let go of the wheel, move over in the passenger seat, allow him to be fully in the driver's seat and taking the wheel, that it's like, this is the right order. This is what God wants, is for
Mm.
this man to lead our relationship and lead our family. And even if the decision he makes ends up blowing up, we're in it together, right? Like that's cool. That's great. We don't expect perfection from you, but to give you that kind of trust in that tender moment, in that
Mm.
grieving time of you, that's a beautiful thing on her part. And for you to just, suggest this in confidence to
Yeah.
her. I love that unity. It's beautiful.
Yeah. She's amazing, and she's so capable and so smart and so wise, and yet she really chose to lean in to that and say, all right, let's do it.
Yes. Okay, so fast forward, you're in Florida now, and you got your three kids. What year is this now? This is like,
We moved in 2021, so we've been here about 4 years now.
okay, okay.
And so it's, yeah, which is crazy. We just hit 4 years and it is absolutely flown by.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, you mentioned right before that you said, once we got here, we were just thinking like, what matters the most?
Mm.
Where are we spending our time and, our energy, and what are we thinking about? How did this transition lead up to this book that you just released?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing was, the choice to come here was founded a lot by some of the realizations coming out of my dad's death. And so when my dad died, he was 74 and I was 37. And it was the first time, well, I take this back. Like, I knew when I was a kid that life was finite because my mom passed away. I had a seriousness
True.
about myself that my friends, that people didn't understand because I had seen somebody close to me die.
Yes.
But like most things, the further you get away from an event and experience something, the sensation fades, the intensity fades. And have I been pretty intentional in my life? Would my friends describe me as intentional? Yes, for sure. And yet at the same time, like most people, I think I'm doing the best I can, trying to live about what I can, but life is going and it's moving fast. And the more variables that come in, the more likely that's the case. And so we're going along and we get there and then it's like, oh man, I might be halfway done. And
Yeah.
my dad being me being half my dad's age was like that, like, could I live longer? Yeah. Could I live shorter? Yeah. But the reality is if I live as long as he did, then I'm at the halfway point.
Yes.
And you know, when things start to become scarce and we know that they're running out, they become more valuable. And so for
Mm.
me, it was this realization of like, I don't want to waste any of this valuable time that I have left. And what happened was I ultimately ended up saying, I want to share my reflections with my friends because most people my age hadn't lost both their parents. And so I had a perspective that most of my friends didn't have. And so I said, all right, I'm going to start writing a weekly email to about 100 guys all over the country, all over the world, people that I love, and just say, hey, I'm going to reflect on what does it mean to win in the places that matter most.
Mm.
And so I started writing this email, and guys, you know, were responding and just encouraging me to keep going and talking about how they related and talking about how it was causing them to think. And so that was sort of the foundation of where Worthy Wins came from. And as I went along, you know, I was writing the email and people sent it to a friend. And then I ultimately turned the newsletter public and just started just wanting to encourage people to, to learn from the things that I had learned, not because I had it all figured out, but because I had a perspective that other people may not have. And ultimately what I realized through my time at Nike, and this is where the Nike part comes in, you know, I would go sit in these conference rooms, Jordan, and there'd be 20 people around the table, all amazing, bright, competent people. And all 20 of them would have a different idea about what success looked like.
Mm.
And so that taught me this truth that is true in organizations, but it's so true in our own lives. So the biggest takeaway I had from my time at Nike was this learning that winning is subjective.
Mm. Yes.
And in order to truly win, we have to make it objective. Otherwise, we could invest all of our time, energy, and attention into something and actually get to an outcome that isn't what we desire. And
Ooh, yes. Like you're saying, at the end of your life, how have you spent your time, energy, and attention? What was it going towards your vision of success? And as Christians, right, our vision of success has to look different from the world.
and you know, there's the reality is we're not all the same either. Just in the same way as those conference rooms, like we're all wired, created different. God has said that each person is unique. They have, you know, their own story. So not everybody's going to define success the same in our lives. But what we're at risk of is ultimately winning at things that don't matter. And the world is going to tell us a bunch of things that matter. You know, our devices are going to pull us into things that don't actually matter in the end. And so it goes back to that time at Nike. So I'd sit in these conference rooms and everybody would have a different idea of success. And so then I'm sitting in this role where I'm the global brand director for Kobe Bryant. And Kobe has this tragic accident. His daughter dies. These other wonderful people pass away unexpectedly and tragically. And I'm one of the few people in Nike that has Kobe in their title at that point. And my job as the global brand director is to help steward the brand of Kobe. And so what that ultimately means is that amongst all the well-intentioned, amazing people in Nike, ultimately I need to be the one who helps steward what are we going to do in response to his passing? And because winning is subjective, how are we going to make sure that whatever we do is actually successful? And you have people from China, Europe, the Philippines, New York, LA, Chicago, Oregon, where everybody had an opinion. And so what we had to do is we had to get extremely clear about what success looked like. And so ultimately there ended up being one slide that went into every single deck that went around the company. And the slide said this, it said, our objective is to pass Mamba mentality on to the next generation of athletes starting with Gen Z girls.
Wow.
And it didn't mean that other people didn't matter. It didn't mean that Gen Z boys didn't matter. It didn't mean that, older generations, it didn't mean that any of those people didn't matter. It just meant there's going to be tons of ideas about what we could do here. If your idea doesn't pass mama mentality on to the next generation of athletes, starting with Gen Z girls, we're not doing it. But
Very
then,
clear.
yes, but then you in China, you in Europe, you in New York, LA, Chicago, great. If you're doing that, awesome. Have at it. Like, do it your own way, do it that thing. But like, we had to get everybody clear about what success looked like, so that then they could go pursue success. That was actually, when we got to the end of the project, we were going to say, hey, we got there.
Whoa. That is awesome. So many things are popping up for me. First, one of the things I want to comment on is that I totally see the red thread throughout this whole thing. It's like the loss that you experienced with your own parents from the time you were, in sixth grade, through the loss of your father, and then to be the global brand marketing guy for Kobe Bryant, and then experience his loss. This was just God's design to have you in this role, and for everybody to be looking at you and saying, now what are we going to do? What are we going to do now that this amazing, famous athlete has been tragically killed along with others in this horrible accident? What is most important? And their eyes are on you. It sounds like you were the one that had to make kind of this decision on what does success look like now for the followers of this fine athlete. And then for you to be like, and your team to say, we're passing on the Mamba mentality to specifically Gen Z girls. Like, we are passing on the legacy of Kobe Bryant in this way. Like, I just see it. Like, it just makes sense. Like, God sets us up for these things in life that we could never see coming or never really truly understand. Why am I in this role? Why is everybody looking to me for this? But it's like, with your experience and your personal connection to loss, it had to have given you the platform to understand what people who maybe idolized Kobe were going through, or just looked up to him, needed in that moment. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, and just the inner workings of the business, and like what happens, right? You could all put your ideas in and everybody could go in a million different directions, but ultimately that's not going to pass on the legacy of this man. And so it sounds like that particular situation, in combination with the other losses that you've experienced in your life and just listening and hearing from God, is like, okay, what really matters, right? What is a worthy win? Like, what is winning when it comes to your life and your wife and your kids and your soul at the end of it all? Was that the springboard for like this reflection email that you started sending out, and sort of this following that you had to consider what you're doing with your time, your energy, and your attention?
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately, right, the world tends to define success by what we accomplish. And it doesn't mean that accomplishments are bad. God has put us on the planet to steward the planet and do things and do well. But if we overinvest in accomplishments and underinvest in relationships, then we're ultimately going to get to the end of our lives and not have one in the places that mattered most. And so
We can't afford to do that. We don't have time.
no, and we don't. The two truths about time that have become abundantly clear for me through this process is one, for everybody, time is running out.
Yep.
So it's scarce. And the second one is that it's indefinite. We don't actually know how much time we have. We might have tons, or we might have not very much. And so if we spend too much time focused on our accomplishments, then we're at risk of missing on things that matter most. And so I wrote the book in a way, my faith is laced through it, and it will encourage people who are followers of Jesus. And it also is a book that I wanted to write in a way that my bosses, my VPs, the leaders at Nike who have given their whole lives to Nike could read it and say, wow, what do I really want to win at?
Mm.
What really matters? And I start the book with a question from John Ortberg, where or a quote from John Ortberg that's basically like, hey, the world doesn't teach us to pay attention to what matters. And so the starting point for all of us is like, so what really matters? What is most important? And we're all going so fast. Just like people were going so fast on that project with Kobe, they had all their ideas. We could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do it. Like everybody's just going. And so Worthy Wins is a call to action to just pump the brakes for a second and stop, so you can define what actually matters the most to you. And it might be different than what matters the most to me, but the things that matter the most at the end ultimately are relationships. And the accomplishments matter as well, but the relationships matter the most. And for me, that starts with my personal relationship with the Lord. It starts with my physical health, because if I'm not healthy, I haven't taken care of myself, then and I'm not connected to God, then that impacts everything. So that's the starting point. And then, okay, my wife, she's a relationship. At the end of my life, I want to be able to say, hey, we were connected. In a world of disconnection, we were connected. And so how do we fight for that? And in my current age of my kids, and right, seasons change, current age of my kids at their age, like presence is the thing that I'm trying to bring them. As they start to get a little bit older, that's going to, yeah, still presence is important, but I'm going to transition more into training and helping prepare them that much more for them going out on their own. But if I'm missing on those first three buckets, myself in connection with God, my wife, and my kids, great. And so I tell a story in the book where about 7 years into my journey at Nike, I'm leading this awesome project. So I'm the basketball lead for the Olympics for 2020. And that basically means, all right, well, I'm leading the basketball work. And so we're going to tell this awesome story. And you can read the book. I don't need to tell you all the details about it. They don't really matter. Here's what matters. 2 months before we're supposed to host all these athletes on Nike's campus, my wife has our third son, which is awesome. I take a few weeks off. I go back to work, and this is like right after Thanksgiving. And so we're sprinting because we're going to host all these athletes right after January 1st.
Okay.
So we're sprinting, and yet at home, my wife's suggesting to have a third kid. At that point we have 3 boys, 4 and under. So it's chaos. And this is pre-COVID, but it's still, and I'm just cranking. And this is like pre-Zoom culture, anything. So like we're doing like conference calls, but I'm coordinating all these people across Nike, 8 or 9 different departments, getting everybody on board. Great. We're all lined up. I'm going. And I get to Christmas Eve and I have this harsh realization, Jordan. I didn't get my wife a meaningful Christmas present. And it wasn't that it wasn't about money spent. It was that what she wanted to know was she was thought of,
Mm.
that she was worthy of my time, energy, and attention as she raises our then 6-week-old child. And so I get to Christmas Eve and realize that I don't have one, and there's nothing I can do to salvage a meaningful gift. And so I had to do this walk of shame where I went and confessed to her, hey, I dropped the ball. And she was gracious, but so hurt.
Oh,
And I didn't intend to not get my wife a Christmas present, right?
I
I
believe
didn't,
you.
I didn't intend that, but intentions aren't going to get us there on their own. And so like, I don't want to, and so the project at work, winning. Everybody loved it. Everybody was happy, received super well. At home, I lost. And, the
Mm.
second most important relationship in my life. And so that was a really pivotal moment for me in thinking through, all my time at Nike was teaching these lessons and weaving it together. But ultimately, then my dad passes away after that and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, I'm at risk of winning at things that don't actually,
Wow.
and I think everybody else is too.
I agree with you. I agree with you. We are all just a hair away from these misaligned priorities. And if you're listening right now going, I'm my priorities are misaligned right now. I am more focused on work. I love my career, John. I love what I do
Mhm.
at Families of Character, coaching parents, doing all this. And at the end of the day, if I prioritize this over my spouse, my kids, my relationship with God, the whole thing has been flipped on its head.
Yeah.
And I am actually idolizing my
Mm.
career and my work and my business.
Mm.
And so I I heard you say, it was the walk of shame, man. I had to come to her and admit that I had prioritized this project over people, over her, right? And that there wasn't anything I
Mm.
could do with it. I was caught red handed and she wasn't going to have something the next day. And uh, again, a woman of God, she has grace, right? She's able to forgive even in her hurt. I had
Mhm.
a client one time and she had lost a child, and a nurse told her, she said, during your grieving, the thing that is going to feel most unfair to you is that you're going to have to forgive people.
Mm.
You're the one that experienced the loss, but you're
Mm.
going to have to forgive people. They're going to say the stupidest things, the most
Mm.
insensitive things. You're going to compare their story to yours and whatever. And you are called to higher ground. You are called to forgive them in your own pain. And I
Yeah.
hear that that's what your wife did, that maybe it wasn't perfect the way she did it or her
She did
response
she
to
did really
you or
well considering the circumstances. She did awesome.
man, but that's another teaching point for us listeners is like, you're not going to get it right personally. I'm going to fall down and I'm going to need the forgiveness of my spouse. And Josh is going to forgive me over and over when I prioritize things above, our relationship with God and our relationship with each other and our kids. And the important part is that we get back on the horse, right?
Yeah.
That we go,
Mhm.
okay, this is the turning point. It's time to reorder the priorities in our lives and focus on what matters most, those things that are worthy wins.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other part that I think for a long time I felt like in order to do worthy wins, I needed to walk a tightrope and that I needed to have perfect balance. And that was the only way that I was going to get worthy wins. And I was sitting with this pastor, his name's Daniel Grothy from Colorado Springs, and I was sitting with him a couple years back, and he's similar to me, a little further on in life than me, but same thing, 3 kids, big responsibilities at his church, wife, lots of things going. And I'm like, hey man, how do you balance it all? And he looks at me, Jordan, and I will never forget the look. He just says, balance is a myth. You dropped the mic, bro. And now I need to know. Now I need to know more. So can you tell me more? And he goes on to tell me, like, ultimately, the reality is life is constantly going to pull us out of balance. And so if we think that we're somehow going to walk the perfect tightrope, it's not realistic. And even like the truth is, like, to accomplish significant things maybe God's put on our life to do, it's going to pull us out of balance. And so he's like, I actually focus on counterbalance as a tactic rather than balance, because
Mm.
counterbalance, he said, if you think about it visually, look at a helicopter, and every helicopter has 2 rotors, whether they're stacked on top of each other or one in the back and one in the front. And the reason they have 2 rotors is because they could fly with one, but they couldn't be in control and make sure they safely got to their destination. They'd lose control. But the second rotor creates counterbalance, all that power, all that stuff, so they can ultimately end up in the place they want to go and land safely and travel safely. And so in our lives, it's the same thing. How do we counter with investments of our time, energy, and attention to pull us back in? And that doesn't mean that we should always be going to the extreme and never spend any time. But the reality is, seasons of life are going to pull us out of balance.
Mm.
And big investments of our time, energy, and attention to invest in things that are meaningful and are important might pull us out of balance. So, like, it may not mean that we're home every single night at 5 p.m. to be home for dinner. And so Daniel was giving me this example. He's like, hey, sometimes at church, there'll be like 3 week sprints where we're deep in it. And so he was like, what I really try to do is I try to communicate really clearly with my family about what's going on. I make commitments to what I'm going to do to counterbalance in the midst of that. And then I have to follow through on those things. So he gave the example. He's like, I might say, hey, I'm a 3 week sprint, but the 3 days before that, I'm going to be off work and I'm going to be home and I'm going to be present. I'm all in. And then I can't be home for dinner every night, but Thursdays and Sunday nights, I'm for sure going to be home in the midst of those 3 weeks. And then when that 3 week sprint's over, I'm going to take a few days off and I'm going to be back in. And those were his examples of saying, like, here's how I counterbalance in the midst of crazy seasons. And so I think for your listeners who, whether, regardless of the age of their kids or anything that's going on, like, we are going to get pulled out of balance, and that is okay. That's reality. That's what, like, if it, and the world handles things differently than us. The problem is, if we don't have the counterbalance to pull us back in, we'll just keep going and going and going and going.
That's right. That's
So
such
how do we
great
pull ourselves back
advice.
in?
Yes, I love the counterbalance and just the analogy of the helicopter, right? You got to
Mm-hmm.
have that second rudder to be able to get where you want to go. And I appreciate that the practical examples of, like, you're not trying to be home every night at 5 o'clock and just have this structure that's exactly the same all the time. Like, this life that God has called us to is a wild ride. We prioritize, we communicate what's going on with our spouse, and to our kids, and we make the moments that we have with them matter, make them meaningful and fully attentive, right? We put work aside, we put our devices away, and we give them our full attention. That may look way out of balance to someone else, but it is doing what matters most and winning in a worthy way,
Yeah.
right? Is to take the sort of ride that God's got us on and adjust to it, and still keep in priority order our relationship with God, our relationship with our spouse, and the unity of our family. I
Mm-hmm.
love it. John, we have an accelerator program. It's called the Thriving Family Accelerator, and it's a coaching course where we take about 6 couples through 6 weeks where they write a faith-filled family mission statement. So
Mm-hmm.
they identify a vision. Where do we want to go? What is the end game for us here?
Yeah.
That's what we do right off the bat. And then we teach couples how to pray together as husband and wife.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you talked about at the very beginning of the podcast. You said, we have always kind of prayed together. That's just been part of our relationship since we got married. There's a statistic that shows that 75 or 50% of people married couples are getting divorced.
Mm.
If you get married a second time, you have a 78% chance of that marriage failing. Even worse, second time around. You go to church with your spouse, you have a 26% chance of divorce. Okay, we're getting better. There's hope here, right? Get the family to church, go to church. This is good. If you pray together as husband and wife every day, not family prayers, but just the two of you, just a short, it could be 30 to 90 seconds a day, you have a 0.0006% chance of divorce, less than 1%. Everything you talked about today points back to that union with your spouse and inviting God in.
Yeah.
Life is throwing us curveballs all the time, right? And God's okay with that. He understands we can handle the curveballs of life. He's prepared us, equipped us to lose our parents, to, get fired from jobs, to have a total pivot, in your career. And if we invite him in collectively as a married couple into our union, we're like unstoppable.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That will bring us to the end of our lives where, we look back and are able to say, for me and my house, we have served the Lord. We have followed the path. We have answered that great call, the commission to go out and share our lives with other people, and that's what it all means.
Yeah.
I was going to tell you just something that popped up in my mind right before we got on this interview. As I was thinking, I thought, there's this kind of the word on the street about, listening to podcasts or going to talks at your church or going to a workshop that someone puts on about parenting that there's 20%, like this 20% of people go to 80% of the things or listen to 80% of the podcast, right? There's a small percentage of people, the same kind of people that are doing these things. But the negative word on the street about us folks is that we are consumers,
Mm.
that all we want to do is read the book, is listen to that episode and go to that talk, because there's a part of us that feels like we are not equipped and we are deficient in some way. And so we need this knowledge. We need to go hear from John. We need to go hear from Jordan at this thing at church or whatever. And we've got these deficits that we have to fill up. And so we do that, but then it goes nowhere. All this information, this knowledge just sits with us. And it struck me that, you know what? This 20% of people who are listening, who are going to these workshops, who want to develop their intellect, we've got to engage our will also.
Mm-hmm.
If we just fill our minds with information, but we fail to answer the call, which is what I heard you say you did. When you were in that space where you thought, you know what, I feel a nudge to just email 100 guys that I really love and just share something that's on my heart with them. You could have said no. That was a crossroads. We have freedom, right, to choose whether we do the thing we feel the Holy Spirit's nudging us to, or we go, oh, but what will they think? If I send an email and 75 of them don't open it, that's not winning. That's not success. No, you just went, I feel compelled to share my reflections and myself with other guys, and look what it's led to. Right? That's what the Great Commission is about. Go out and spread the good news. Share your life, the gospel, with others in whatever unique, awesome way God has equipped you to do that. So, John, thank you for your willingness to not keep your story to yourself, because that's a choice that you always have, is to just keep that within you. But by your willingness to share it through email, through podcast episodes like this, interviews, through your work now that you are part of at Unitas, right?
Yep.
This is where the Lord is like setting you on fire, right? He's like, yes, I'm joining you in your passion so that you can prepare people to really understand worthy wins. First, your relationship with God, then your spouse, then your kids. Make it count. So thank you for being with us today, John. This message has been amazing. It's blessed me personally, and I can guarantee it will bless many people for months and years to come.
Thank you, Jordan. It's been a pleasure, and I'm so excited about what you're doing with your work too. So it's been fun to get to know you and see the awesome work you're doing in the world.
Thanks. Let's stay connected. And guys, check out his book. You can get it wherever books are sold and on Amazon, Worthy Wins by John Olinger. Thank you so much. And we will catch you on another episode of our show real soon.